Dr. Kathy Evans, NCDA's past president, is going to be speaking with us. Kathy has authored a book that NCDA recently published entitled Gaining Cultural Competence in Career Counseling. She had researched this topic extensively and decided to write this book because there were no available texts that help students understand the synthesis of culture and career. The book is available through the NCDA Resource Store online in both print and electronic versions. We welcome Kathy in her presentation where she will discuss creatively incorporating Black Lives Matter in career practice. Welcome, Kathy.
I had the honor of being president of NCDA when we had our first virtual conference for the whole organization in July of last year. I was thrilled at how well it went, and I'm happy that we're able to continue to offer quality professional development to our members during the global pandemic. As Seth said, today my talk is entitled Creatively Incorporating Black Lives Matter in Career Practice. The reasons why I chose to do this are twofold. The first is the fact that I couldn't resist doing a session on Black lives during Black History Month. The second is that although I have spent most of my life writing, researching, and teaching about diversity in many forms, my interest in this area began with having the lived experience of being a Black woman in America. Before I say anything further about my talk, I want to acknowledge that for career professionals, this has been a very difficult time. Economists have said that unemployment during this pandemic is higher than it was during the Great Depression. I remember seeing those old-timey newsreels that showed the bread lines in the 1930s, and now we see similar lines of cars of people who are food insecure. It is a difficult time for us, and my talk will highlight the African Americans and Blacks, I'm going to use those terms interchangeably, during this time. I must warn you that I am a diehard academic. I love to use definitions and data, so expect to see a bunch of those, and I'm sorry, but not really sorry. I know the term Black Lives Matter initially invoked some really negative public reactions, but the fact that millions of people from every state and 3 different countries have joined in with this particular movement, the Black Lives Matter movement this summer, is a testament to the deep understanding of the meaning of the term. Anger and outrage over the murder of George Floyd and so many other unarmed Black men and women took on an even broader significance of not only a call for equal justice, but a call for anti-racism. Black History Month is for celebrating the contributions of African Americans that they have made to the United States and all our unsung heroes. It is still another way of saying Black Lives Matter. Until recently, I made it a point to post 1 or 2 historical facts about African Americans every day in February on my Facebook page, because most of my Facebook friends are not Black. I got feedback from folks saying, I didn't know that. Thanks for posting this. I had no idea. But the truth is, there really shouldn't have to be a Black History Month if Black lives really mattered in this country. We would all know this stuff. Why is it important to career practitioners? Because we have to deal with the reality of our clients' everyday lives. The reality is that because of racism and its many forms, African Americans fare far worse than most other groups. My dad used to say, I can find a picture of him. There he is. My dad used to say that when white men get a cold, Black men get pneumonia. And that certainly seems to be the case during this pandemic. Of particular interest to us today is that during this horrific economic downturn, African Americans suffered 16.7% unemployment, the highest of all racial groups. They are overrepresented among people living in poverty. They tend to work in lower paying occupations, and the wage gap between Blacks and whites is 87 cents to $1 for men and 80 cents to $1 for women, and that's in comparison to white men. At the peak of the pandemic last spring, more than 1/4 of Black Americans were classified as underemployed, meaning they probably were working less than full time, or they were working in jobs that they were overqualified for them. This was 1.5 times the underemployment rate for white Americans. What is more astounding is that although wages have increased between 2000 and 2018, the wage gap has increased. Even among middle and upper class African Americans, there is a wealth gap that basically white Americans, wealth gap that shows that the difference between your assets and whatever your debts are. And it's really important during an economic downturn to be able to have money to fall back on. But for whites, the median white household held a wealth of $188,200. That was 7.8 times the typical wealth of African American households, which was $24,100. We won't even begin to talk about the disparities in education and health, but all have an effect on the careers that are available and the lifestyle that is available to African Americans. With the marches this summer, with the marches this summer, we found that it went beyond the social justice feelings. It went to the point that we need to start thinking about the reason why these problems exist. And they basically focused in on structural racism. Structural racism is my first definition, is a combination of public policies, institutional practice, social ideologies, and processes that generate and perpetuate the inequality of the races. And it's not unlike the definition that I have always used of institutional racism. And the American Psychiatric Association describes institutional racism as policies and practices within and across institutions that produce outcomes that chronically favor or put a racial group in a disadvantage. Rather than blaming African Americans for the hardships they live with, there is a recognition that there are built-in systems derived from centuries of discriminatory practices and policies designed to keep African Americans at a disadvantage. These policies range from redlining, which is basically refusing to give insurance and loans to African Americans, to the Black codes that were common during the Jim Crow era, which basically had influence over what African Americans could do and could not do. They also strictly limited many opportunities in the Southern states, all of which contributed to the disproportionate accumulation of wealth held by African Americans compared to white households. It exacerbated the fragility of these households. In 2019, 33% of all of the discrimination cases brought before the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission were for discrimination on the basis of race. That's not to say that all of these complaints were valid, but we also cannot say how many legitimate violations were left unchallenged. The EEOC oversees complaints and violations of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And it basically applies to what they call protected classes. Protected classes are for race, color, religion, national origin, age, disability, genetic information, and sex, which now includes, as of this past summer, gender, identity, and sexual orientation. So the Civil Rights Act covers discrimination on the basis of these next items that I'm going to list for those protected classes. And it covers testing, use of company facilities, training, apprenticeship programs, fringe benefits, pay retirement plans, disability, leave, hiring, firing, compensation, classification of employments, transfer and promotion, job advertisements, recruitment, all of those kinds of things. It covers a broad territory. And you probably have even had clients or friends or even yourself who said that they've been discriminated against because they were in a marginalized group when applying for their jobs or being appointed to a committee chair or opportunities for travel to promote the business or even getting professional development like we're doing today. These are all activities that would be covered by Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. There are set procedures that clients can follow to file a complaint. And when I Googled civil rights violations and civil rights claims, I find that there's also a lot of people out there to help you because I got a lot of pages and pages of attorneys out there ready to help you with your EEOC claims. You might think, well, that's great. All your client has to do is file a complaint, and your job would be to be a support and to be a cheerleader. However, it is likely that your client, say her name is Sophia, may be so afraid of losing her job that she doesn't want to make a complaint. Or she may feel that it would cause too much trouble and she would have to leave her job anyway because it would be too uncomfortable to stay. You could tell her that it is illegal for the employer to fire her, to demote her, or harass her if she files a complaint. That would be true. However, there's also the problem of retaliation. And retaliation is something that is really, really growing in our country. And that is the fact that employers are doing things to basically hurt clients who are filed for EEO complaints. Retaliation charges represent the majority of charges in 2019 at 53.8%. That's more than half of the complaints were about retaliation. In fact, it is the most common complaint that the EEOC receives. I have a colleague who is battling that right now with her employer. And the problem is the employer seems to not get it because they seem to be digging themselves deeper and deeper into civil rights violations, even after she's hired a lawyer to help her with her case. The fact that these injustices exist and are easily identified, there are remedies already in place to help clients. However, a client has to be willing to file a complaint, and more often than not, they won't. It is sad, but depending on what you read and where you live, since 2016, this is a presidential campaign and election, there has been an uptick in the number of incidents of harassment due to race, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, both in schools and in workplace, not to mention the ones that occur in the general public. The climate in this country has changed to the fact where individuals are less likely to hide their prejudices and biases. It's changed to the point that, from what I've seen and heard from friends of friends and on social media, some people seem to be proud of these discriminatory beliefs and behaviors, stating that they are Americans. And this is something that has been evidenced by the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. It's not uncommon for the beliefs like these to lead to a harassment at work. Harassment is a more subtle social justice issue and results in chilly corporate climate or chilly campus climate. In schools, K-12 schools, they usually call it bullying. Harassment like this typically occurs daily. Usually when we speak of chilly climate, it's associated with sexual harassment. But other forms of chilly climate occur, including that of racial harassment. And the EEOC has define this type of harassment. It's interesting when you look at their website, they have a small description of sexual harassment, but look at this long description that they have for racial harassment. It is unwelcome conduct that unreasonably interferes with individuals' work performance or creates intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. Examples include harassing conduct, including offensive jokes, slurs, epithets, name-calling, physical assaults or threats, intimidation, ridicule, or mockery, insults or put-downs, offensive objects or pictures, and interference with work performance. This is one I really like to focus in on too. An employer may be held liable for harassing conduct of supervisors, coworkers, and even non-employees if they are control of that person's behavior. I painted a pretty dismal picture of the lives of African Americans in this country. And I've done that on purpose because non-Black people are able to go about their lives without knowing these things. And even though Black people live them daily. When others are blind to the injustices that occur to another group, it is if they don't matter. You have to open your eyes and open your minds to truly understand what it is meant by the phrase, Black Lives Matter. We do matter, and understand what to do to show we matter, and understand what you need to do to show that we matter. And how would you do that? Now, I do workshops on anti-racism, social justice, and today I want to focus on how you can use your creativity to help clients. And especially those who experience racial injustices, harassments, and even microaggressions, which I haven't gone into today. But again, those are little digs that people have that remind that person that they are different. When I say using creativity, there's lots of things that might come to mind. We may think about crafts, we may think about painting, we may think about dancing, we may think about writing music or playing an instrument. But I'm thinking a little bit broader than that. I'm thinking about what I can do if you don't have any of those talents. So Gladding and Henderson in 2000 published a definition that they had of creativity. And they said that creativity is the arrangement or rearrangement of elements so that a new and productive process or product is formed. I like that because I never thought I was particularly creative. And I find by reading that definition that I have been creative all of the time. This definition helped me to see how creative I really was because I rarely leave things as I find them. I love rearranging stuff to make it more functional, more comfortable, more understandable, more fun. And who knew that was creativity? When you work with a client who is experiencing injustices, I don't expect that you will, try to get that person to sing and dance or do whatever, unless, of course, that's part of their skills that they're trying to sell. But I do think that you can be creative even if you don't have those kinds of skills. I want you to think about what you can do to show that you understand and that you will try to adjust what you're doing with your clients to show that you understand that Black Lives Matter. Think about the theories that you use and that you're drawn to and whether those theories really reflect what the needs are for your particular client. And maybe what creativity will mean for you is to adjust the theory. So you may want to combine your theories. You may want to look at your theories and say, okay, what can I do that won't really change the theory completely, but will make it more functional for that particular client or client group. So you may want to combine a couple of theories, say developmental and solution focus, and see how you can fit them together so that they may respond more to the kinds of issues that your client might be having. So it might be adapting a theory to overcome shortcomings with Black clients or to combine two or more theories that might work better. That's one of the things that I pointed out in the Gaining Cultural Competence book, is that you need to think about how you would use the theory so that it better reflects what kinds of issues, the culture of that particular client. And the next thing you might want to do is to change a technique that you may normally use with a client that might be more reflective to your African American clients. I remember trying to fix the type of things that I did with my clients to reflect the kinds of things that they were used to doing either in their homes or their churches or something that they already told me about that they do, and kind of creating my techniques that I'm using to help them to buy into it a little bit better. I remember years ago when I was working with clients, and I wanted them to understand when I explained that the cultural bias of intelligence testing, for example, to them. And I wanted them to understand why people were questioning whether or not the intelligence tests were biased against certain cultural groups. So I used Williams' 1977 Black IQ test, which he called the bitch test, which is Black intelligence tests for cultural heterogeneity. And so I used that. It's just outdated now, but it had relevance when I first started using it. And your creativity, you might be able to look back at it and see what could you bring it, how could you bring it up to date so it would be relevant to be able to explain that same kind of issue about cultural bias. To illustrate that, one of the items was, which brand name does not belong? Maurice, Royal Crown, Dixie Peach, or Preparation H? And probably Preparation H stands out to most people, and they would pick that. But if you're African American, those other three would tell you what? It would tell you something about hair care products for African Americans. And so one of the things that you would do to try and update that is maybe some of the common hair care products that we're using today. So again, having to just explain that to clients so that they can explain it, understand better what we mean about cultural bias. I like using qualitative assessments, and I use that for them, for clients to be able to connect better with the kinds of career assessments that we use. I like using it because it gives me a lot of chance to interact with my client. I believe it's more personal, and it allows the client to talk about or create their own narratives about their own life process. I couldn't always afford to buy the instruments, but I could create them. I like card sorts, and I also found out that I was able to create cards for the occupations that were familiar with my clients, or that my clients might call a little bit differently because of their cultural group. So I also would find that creating some different kinds of things to include into those qualitative instruments that you might be using to increase the way that you're having a client identify their issues, to increase their helping to come up with alternatives and things like that when you're using those qualitative assessments. Those are always so much fun to use. You also want to try and use some of those shortcomings of the standardized tests to interpret your results. So what are some of the ways that you can do that with your clients? And basically, I always just tell clients, okay, these are some of the things that we found. This is some of the problems that we've had with standardized testing. For example, they don't have enough African Americans in the normative samples. So I'm going to now interpret this test, but you're going to know that it really doesn't apply as well to African Americans as it might do to middle-class white males. So again, we're going to look at this, and we're going to take this with a grain of salt, because it may or may have may or may not have cultural bias, whatever, but we're going to get some feedback out of this, because there has been research that shows that standardized testing is predictive for African Americans. So we're going to see what we can use out of this information. And I think that takes some of the sting out of the knowledge that African Americans score lower on these standardized testing. It's like, okay, we need to look at it with that in mind. And what are some of the reasons why this is happening? And tell you the truth, nobody's figured that out yet. So that would be something to tell people too about why that's happening. There's so much that you can do that might be creative to help your clients deal with the injustices that they encounter. So I encourage you to use your creativity in doing that. There is so much going on with African Americans that you probably can spend a very long time helping them with different issues. And so that's up to you to be able to zero in on the kinds of things that are most relevant to the clients right now, especially during the pandemic, where people are facing underemployment, unemployment, eviction, those kinds of things. So there's much that you can do and how you can use your creativity. And you need to basically understand that the issues for African Americans starts with understanding the history of African Americans in work. The legacy of slavery lives on as long as there is structural and institutional racism. So building on the resiliency of African descendants, but also the collective memory of centuries of mistreatment is important. Use your empathy, your knowledge, your expertise, and of course, your creativity to let your clients know that Black lives matter to you. And thank you. I will take questions now. I think that Alicia was going to help me with that.
Yes, I am. Our first question actually is from Michelle DeRosa, and she is asking about your book that is getting ready to come out. If you would like to give them the title and some information on that.
Okay, it's called Gaining Cultural Competence in Career Development, in Career Counseling, in Career Counseling. I should know the name of my book, right? It's the second edition, and I know that they were getting ready to put it up on the Resource Center, so it's available right now in a digital form, and it will be available in hard copy soon. And I have a co-author that I have included this time with, her name is Aubrey Sayet. So it's Kathy Evans and Aubrey Sayet are the authors. I see something about the strong interest inventory, and they were asking about other inventories that were available. I know using the strong, they've gotten so elaborate with the strong right now. But the strong has done some things to try and get rid of a bias, but it really hasn't been as successful. The populations they use haven't been as large as we would like to have them. To me, I go back to that qualitative stuff because I don't really see an instrument that's more standardized or that's one of those commercial ones that you can use on the computer that's going to kind of get rid of some of the biases that some are going to be inherent. And the biases I'm talking about are certain groups score higher, for example, for African Americans on social occupations, but they score really low on engineering types of occupations. If I want to get kids interested in engineering, I don't want to show them that, oh, look, they're not really interested in that. I want to look at those low categories and say, okay, let's see if there might be some ways that you might be able to use some of your creativity, some of your knowledge, whatever, your skills in this particular area. So I've always used a strong interest inventory to help people understand more about careers they don't know about. And usually they don't say they like something if they don't know what it is. So it's all about educating people. But I like using those card sorts because one of the things that I do with the card sort, it has the name of the career on the front and explains what the career is on the back. So if somebody doesn't know if they would like this particular career, it explains what you would do in that career on the back of it, and it gives them that information. Because when you use something like the strong interest inventory, it just really check off, is this a career I would like or not like? Is this a particular activity I would like or not like? And if you don't know what that is, you don't know whether you would like it or not like it. I always used to tell my nephew who said that he doesn't like this particular food. And I say, did you ever have that before? And he says, no. I said, how do you know you don't like it? So it's the same thing with careers. They don't know they don't like something because they don't know anything about it. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Kathy. I do want to let everybody know real quick, I did just post the link for Kathy's book in the chat section. It is available online for pre-order and it will begin shipping mid-March. So I posted that link there for you guys. We do have a couple more questions that have come through. What are some qualitative assessments that you'd suggest for career exploration?
As I said, one of the things that I like to do is the card sort kinds of things. I'm trying to think of some of the ones for, I keep thinking about, I had so much to do with elementary school when I was last teaching. So we used a lot of things with pictures on them and showing students what those pictures were and getting kids to understand about these different careers to show what these people do. Some of the other qualitative instruments, I just looked at a whole bunch of them and they're not coming to the front of my head at this point. But I'm thinking about things that you can use about listing skills, think about things that they use. What is it that you do every day? And that you can kind of help them look at what they do and pull out their skills. One of the things I use a lot when I was doing practice with career counseling is Richard Bowles' What Color's Your Parachute? And even though he wasn't a career counselor, he did that parachute book every year. And he had a lot of qualitative resources in there. And it all was about, think about the things that you enjoy doing and then pulling skills out from those things that you really enjoy doing. And so it's really getting things that come straight from the individual. He had a lot of little checklists and things like that that people could use. We have a wonderful source in NCDA for career assessments, and they have a whole section on qualitative types of instruments. So you might want to look on this for some more specific references. It's the CG7, a guided career assessments for counselors.
Thank you. Okay, next question is from Chris. What recommendations would you have for counselor educators who are training future career counselors?
I think that the most important thing to remember is that the traditional theories that we've been teaching people may or may not apply to people of color, especially for African Americans, because most of them, those modernist theories, they were really focused on, or the supporting research on those was done on white middle-class males. And so it's more applicable to white middle-class males. So I need to figure out what are some of the things that are different about the population, such as African Americans, from those individuals. And we can't think about the fact that they're paid less. They are, they have more difficulty getting raises and promotions and things like that. So having that kind of a knowledge is going to help you understand why that particular theory may not approach what individuals need. And I think you need to always look at all the theories with a grain of salt, because I even think some of the new postmodern theories need to be looked at with a grain of salt, because you can't go in there just thinking, I'm going to look at that particular individual and whatever she or he thinks is what I'm going to go with, because if you don't really have a background in that person's culture, you may not understand exactly what they're thinking and what they're doing. So you need to have some ideas that you can help pull more things out of them because you know something about their culture. So we always are going to have a cultural backdrop to whatever we do. And we have to look at those theories with a little bit of skepticism about whether or not they would apply across the board. And if they do apply, what is different about how that application works? When I kind of think about the predictability of achievement of aptitude tests, and while I say they are predictable for people of color, especially African Americans, yes, but what happens with those people who exceed that particular prediction? And why is it that we're still having people score lower on tests and in classroom? Okay, so that we may be seeing bias in the classroom as well. So I'm thinking that's one of the biggest things I would have to look for is the theories that you're teaching people and making sure that they understand the cultural background of their clients.
Here's one from Leanne. Are there theories that better represent Black people's experience? I was thinking structural theories.
I'm trying to think what you mean by structural theories. Are you thinking about the modern theories, like the ones we like to teach people, Holland theories and things like that? Is that, I guess I'm trying to get clarification on the question. But I do opportunity structure.
Let's see. She yep, opportunity structure.
Okay. The interesting thing is, I think that one thing that we need to do as a profession is to really get involved in advocacy and understanding where there may be some opportunities that people are looking for, increasing that population in their area. For example, there's lots of grants out helping people get kids interested in STEM careers, science, math, engineering careers. So we're trying to get kids to look more about the technology and science careers early on so that they will, again, approach that when they get older and actually into those careers. And so there's lots of grants out there, lots of opportunities, lots of programs out there to help increase those kinds of opportunities. But the structural kinds of things that have to go on are the things that are in colleges and universities, that are in employers. What are some of the things that we are doing that are making it more difficult for this particular population? I'll give you an example. I worked for 30 years as a college professor, and in the last institution where I got most of my years in, at the University of South Carolina, I had 3 raises because of inequity. Okay, 2 of those raises because at my rank, women were making less money than the men. Okay, and the 3rd raise was because African Americans were making less money than. That's it backwards. Men were making more money than women. That's why I got those 2 raises. And the same thing happened in terms of race. So there's inequity built in there already. It wasn't that I was producing less, and it just was how they valued what I was producing. I said, okay, so I didn't produce 12 articles, but I produced that one article in a highly revered journal that my colleagues and I said they took one a year, one Black article a year. Okay, so there was the structural racism in terms of the journals that were being published, in terms of how they evaluated me. And so that's the kind of stuff that we need to change. We need to have people look at what they're doing. And that's one thing I think about the advocacy, going in there and saying, why is it that this person got this particular rating? What went into that? And what were the criteria that made it harder for this particular person that you had to make up raises for them? Let me not get the raises in the first place. Okay, so again, those are the kinds of advocacy things I can see us doing. And we're going to have to continue to bring it to people's awareness. There's racial profiling everywhere. Okay, can't get away from it. The fact that if I'm writing about Black people, I'm not going to get published, and I'm not going to do this. And that's gotten better over the years, but it still happens. Okay, and the same thing happens in all different careers. But do you think that there's still a wage gap? So we have to do something about those kinds of structures. How do you evaluate? How do you give raises? And the meritocracy is not really working for African Americans.
Here's another question. Do you have any suggestions for quickly making it clear to students and clients that Black lives matter to us? I tried to make that evidence of care quickly evident for transgender students by sharing and asking about pronouns. Is there anything similar that I should be saying or asking about?
Gee, I have something in my book, and actually a couple of my books, and to get people aware of the kinds of things that they're doing that promote microaggressions. Okay, and microaggressions are those little things that you say to people. For example, I told somebody very early on in my career that I came from a middle-class Black family, and this person was like unbelieving. They didn't believe that I was from a middle-class Black family. They didn't believe that middle class existed except on the Cosby Show. So it's like, okay, we don't have the idea about whether or not people actually fit into this particular category because, and so to talk about, the fact that, oh, aren't you having free lunch? Because you're Black, all the Black people have free lunch. And so that kind of thing. So those little microaggressions, those things that you say to people that you don't think is hurtful, but it is. One of my friends said to me one time when I was talking about my actual book that I was writing at that time, and she says, well, I don't understand the problem because I don't see you as Black. And she didn't realize that to me was insulting. Okay, so those kinds of little microaggressions that we need to kind of watch out for. I think that might be very helpful to students because it really does help to raise their awareness to the kinds of things that they may be doing that may be hurtful. And that applies to not only people of color, but it also applies to LGBT and transgender because people do these little digs and it's hurtful and they have to go through this every single day.
Thank you. We've had several people that have asked about the card sorts that you have used. If you could provide a link for those was one of the questions. And then another one was you mentioned that you made your own card sorts for careers that were more relevant to African American clients. Can you say more about which careers those are?
Okay, so for example, the occupations that they may have seen in their area, and they did not necessarily show up on my card sort. So it might have been something like a letter carrier, which didn't show up on the card. So this probably should have. And I'm trying to think of some other ones that I had to stick in there. It was really interesting because these are some of the common careers that weren't showing up in my card. So like, I know what it was. It was more of those occupations were showing up that required 2- and 4-year colleges. And they weren't requiring education past high school. So I was putting in careers that were not college requirement, people who were making good money that they have seen in their community, like people who were barbers, people who were, those careers weren't showing up on those card sorts for me. And so I had to put in some of those careers that kids had seen. They knew who a barber was, they knew who a mechanic was, they knew those kinds of careers, who the letter carriers were, because most of the people that they saw in their communities were Black who had those careers. And so they needed to know something about those careers. So those are the kinds of things that I saw that I had to include into it. Clergymen, and I think clergymen did show up on those careers. And so different things that people knew from their community, what they saw, what their family was seeing. There was no card there for somebody who was a housekeeper. Something that they knew, so they would feel, okay, this is something that's important because it's in this card sort. Okay, and if I don't see somebody that I know in my card sort, it means that there's something wrong with whatever it is that they do. So that's what I was thinking of when I made my little cards.
This one comes from Nicola. How do you advise helping Black students who experience imposter syndrome?
Oh, wow. Well, I know, having suffered it myself, it's a very difficult thing. And for those who don't know what imposter syndrome is, like, I get into a certain program or a certain job, get hired by a certain job, and I think that I don't belong here. And then it really is exacerbated by the fact of affirmative action, people thinking that you only got hired because you were Black and that you really did not have the skills or the knowledge to be able to do this particular job. And it's really hard if a person, as they were growing up, was not given good, what we call racial indoctrination as they were growing up, in terms of, this isn't about you. This is about somebody else's biases. And so if they're thinking that you got there because of affirmative action and you don't belong there, that's their problem. And helping people to understand that you belong here. And even if you got here because of affirmative action, you can prove that you belong here because you got here. You have what it takes to do that. So it's very difficult to kind of start from scratch with that if they haven't had it. But that's one thing that I would do. And that would do some things to help them understand and become proud of who they are. So to me, it would go into racial identity kinds of things. those are the things I try to bring up their racial identity and more positive, because one of the things that they might think is because I'm Black, I don't belong here. And having been and only in so many different places for myself, having to think about those kinds of things. Do I really belong here? And I got here by mistake, and then somebody's going to find out. That's what the imposter syndrome seems to be all about. And all I can say is that helping that person understand, yes, you do belong here, and building up the fact that that they have that particular skill. That's why they're there. And even if they did get there because of some kind of special program, that they can do this, that they wouldn't be here if they couldn't. And I think that's the important thing to try and always reinforce for them that it is, and try to bring up that positive racial identity. What are some of the good things? We do this one month where we talk about Black history. And we need to do this for our students every month, every week, every day, to understand this is something that you can do and who you are. And it's good. It's like, I keep thinking about the reason why there's a me, this is why I am here, is because I had really strong ancestors that were able to survive the Middle Passage, that were able to survive racism, that was able to survive Jim Crow, and that's why I'm still here. And those are the kinds of things that you have to keep reiterating with the students.
Our next question comes from Ed Pelosi. He says, Kathy, please share a little more about why the lived experience really is important for both clients and counselors.
Well, I guess that's where we have to work from, because you have to understand what it is these people are experiencing, what you're experiencing, and before you can even start to work with a client, to understand how to help them. So yeah, my lived experience, I can talk about those kinds of things that are just about me. It helps me to understand my Black experience, but I also understand some of the people that I have been friends with. I have relatives, their experiences are different. And so I know that I need to take something from them. I need to take something from all these other individuals that I know to be able to help my clients, because I have lived my own life, not theirs. And so it's important to take some things from them. But there are a lot of stuff that, again, that if you're on this particular culture, you have a lot of things in common. And so we need to be able to try to pull on those kinds of things too. So you learn about a culture, and if you don't know something, you ask. And I think that part of, you may feel very comfortable because you have lived this particular experience, but you can't always predict how the client is experiencing that particular experience. So we all experience our lives differently. I always think it's so funny how differently my siblings experience our home as compared to me. And it's like, so everybody's experience is different. But again, my experience helps me to understand theirs, because I basically experience it right along with them. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I can think of.
Our next question is from Carol Taylor. Do you have a preferred way to learn about other cultures, especially people of color?
My preferred way is to become friends. My students, I used to assign my students ways of learning about cultural groups, and one of the assignments that they could choose from was making friends with somebody from a different culture. And they said, how could you make that be a requirement for the class? And I said, oh, it's one of the things you can do. But to me, that's the best way of understanding somebody, is to actually connect with that person and find out who they are and what their life is like. One of the activities that they had to do was go spend a weekend with that particular group, cultural group. Go with them to wherever they worship. Go with them to the kinds of cultural events that they go to in their culture, and see what that is like. And so my favorite thing is, dive right in there and go in there and understand that. I used to hang out with my Latina friends in graduate school, and there's a whole group of students that came from all different countries in South America, and they all, of course, spoke Spanish fluently. And said, "Oh, everybody, be careful. Kathy's here. She's not fluent in Spanish." I said, "Yeah, but I understand a lot more than I can speak. So please help me to figure out what it's like to be with you, so that you don't feel so stifled and not using language, but your first language. And so it helped me to be able to just be around people who were speaking Spanish. And it really did help my comprehension because I'm like looking at them and watching their mouths and trying to understand, but it did help me to understand their interactions because it's easier to interact in your first language than it is to kind of always thinking about translating or making sure that this outsider feels comfortable. And I didn't want that. I wanted to make sure that I was part of that culture, understanding, experiencing as they were. And it always was fun going out to the different dance clubs with them because then we didn't have to talk.
All right. I think that is all the time that we have, and it looks like we've gotten to just about all of the questions. So thank you, Kathy, for your presentation.